My call to missions was a very special experience to me and surprised me and made me feel honored. It happened during the first day in class in the second year in seminary, which would be in September of 1952. The only missions class I ever studied, honestly, was this one. It was history of mission, so it was just an overview of the spread of Christianity and the mission work around the world. We had a classmate who had been to Japan that summer as a summer missionary, and the teacher was aware of this, and so he asked him to share a little bit about his experience. And he was sharing with us the multitudes of people there in the Orient and how few preachers, missionaries or national preachers there were, and what a great need there was for them. And so I was looking around the room at our classmates to see who I thought might make a good potential missionary. And as I was doing that, it's just like the Lord spoke to my heart, and I was conscious of Him asking me, "Why don't you go?" Well, like I said, that was a shock and surprise, and I just hadn't thought about myself as being qualified to do that, but I was very happy and excited about it and couldn't wait to get home. But Maxine, she'd already kind of given in on marrying a preacher because she knew how pastors' wives had to live out in country churches, and that was probably where I was headed for. But she finally agreed to marry me, and so when I came home with that message about being a foreign missionary, that was a lot for her to take in. She wasn't against it, but she didn't feel like she was qualified or that and she knew she hadn't had a call. So, she went with me to quite a few mission programs and heard Dr. Coffin and some of our very fine predecessors and heroes and leaders at the mission board. But when it came time for the invitation, she was always stood her ground that she hadn't had a call yet. So finally, after we'd finished seminary and moved to our first church field, which was a field of 6 little churches close to Pineapple, Alabama, we had a missionary speaker, a couple of them, in the course of the time we were there, and every time one of them came, I got the old feeling again and the sense of that's what we ought to be doing. And so finally she agreed for us to ride off and get the application forms from the mission board. As we were filling them out, we were in 2 separate rooms. We weren't conferring on it. Each one was filling out his own form or her own form. And she came to the room where I was, and she said, "Darling, I can't lie about this." Said, question number 5 said, "Do you know that you have had a personal call?" Because she'd already told me that if it was just, she would be glad to go with me and take care of the kids and be the hostess and the housekeeper and the regular wifely duties and motherly duties, but she didn't feel qualified to be a teacher or a preacher or do mission work as she thought about it. So we just kind of let it rest, and I said, well, let's just send the forms back then and go on ahead trying to support missions, because I had preached about it and was able to lead our church people to give more for Lottie Moon than they ever had before. So that seemed like that was going to be our role as far as foreign missions went. December 7th, 1957, we had moved to another church here in Anniston, Alabama, and I was getting ready to preach before taking up our Lottie Moon offering. I think we had, in fact, I asked the deacons about that because this was shortly after we'd gotten there, and they finally agreed to the idea. that we take up an offering as well as what the people gave through the organizations. So I wanted a good atmosphere, and I wanted the people to really be aware of the need, and so I asked Maxine to sing a solo that day. I was working on the bulletin, and she said, "Well, darling, you know I'm not a soloist." She was an alto, very good alto, but I said, "Well, I want you to do it." She mentioned another lady that was a soloist, but I said, "I really want you to do it." And she said, "Well, what song you want me to sing?" So I told her the number of the hymn in the Broadman hymnal, and she looked it up, and it was the name of the hymn is "How Long Must We Wait?" About an African man who had come several times to see the missionary in a distant place and asked him to come to their village, and he always had to turn him down because of his workload elsewhere. But so finally, the man asked the missionary, said, "How long must we wait?" So it's a powerful missionary hymn. Well, she sat down and started practicing, and while she was doing that, I jumped in the car and made some house calls and some other things I had to tend to. And when I got back, she said, "Darn, there's something I need to tell you." I said, "Well, can we get to it a little bit later?" Because it was time for her to go to a prayer meeting at WMU Week of Prayer at the church. And then when she got back from that, she needed to go get our weekly groceries. And when she got back with the car that time, I had a call from the hospital. So by the time I got home from that, it was about 9 o'clock at night. And as I stepped in the door, I said, "Darn, what was it you wanted to tell me about?" And she was sitting on the sofa, folding Bobby's diapers. And she just lit up and said, "Well, the Lord called me to missions today." And I was so excited, and she was too. And thinking about it, one aspect of it, I think the reason she was so happy because she knew that was what I wanted to do, and that we could fulfill that, the answer to God's call. So we got in touch with the mission board and did all the things we were supposed to do. And by June, then, we were invited to go to the orientation. We had a 10-day orientation program at Baylor University campus. I thought probably the Lord would want to send us to Africa because we had a concern for black people and their problems and needs, and we knew missionaries were needed, were scarce there. So we went to the Africa after we had our first get-together there at Baylor. Then they divided us up in area groups of where we might be interested in going or thinking about going, and had missionaries from each place to be there to answer questions and all. And so it was interesting, but I didn't really feel a special sense of leading or that the Lord wanted us to go there. But we were out walking around talking with different people, and not together at that time. And I found this table out in the foyer there with leaflets about the different countries. And the first one I picked up was the one about Thailand, written by Ronald Hill. And it told us about the masses of people and the few churches that were here and the lack of missionary and national Christians. And the Lord just laid that on my heart, and I felt, this is where we ought to go, if it could work out that way. Well, later, when we got back together at the dorm room where we were staying, we got to talking about it, and Maxine said, "Darling, I really don't think the Lord wants us to go to Africa." Said, "I read this brochure about Thailand, and I just felt that was the place. I felt so certain about it." And of course, I told her what happened to me, and we both got got down and prayed about it and thanked the Lord for helping us to know where He wanted us to go, even though we didn't know much about Thailand at that time. The next day I asked Dr. Crawley, our area secretary, if he thought that we could get appointed to Thailand if we met all the qualifications. And I told him about our experience and feeling led in that direction, and he said, "Oh, that would be wonderful." Said, "We've been praying for missionaries to go, volunteers to go to Thailand, because we haven't had many in the last several years." And so he said, everything else works out. He said, "You'll be sure to be approved to go there." But he said, "I want to tell you," he said, "there's not any big churches over there, not any mega churches if you're used to that kind of thing." And I said, I never had any experience in anything but small churches my whole ministry of 10 years up to that time. And so that was how we left the orientation meeting, with that sense of peace. And after our first visit to Cha-Ching Sao, which happened to be exactly 1 year to the day from Maxine's call, it was December 7th, 1958, we had a wonderful reception by the little group of church members there. And they were so excited and pleased about us coming there. And because this had been the request from our personnel committee in the mission, they had sent us a letter that arrived when we were ship docked in Yokohama, they'd like for us to consider that. And Ronald had some contact with the folks there, so he was able to tell us a little bit more about it. But that day, after that first visit, I told Maxine, this place feels just like home. I mean, we'd never been there before, new people, everything was new, but we just had that sense of peace and like that warm feeling you have when you get home. And so that was our call, and we followed through. I started going there to preach once a month during language school, and then we moved after we finished language school, moved in September of 1960. But early on, during that period when we were still in language school, in April of 1960, they had a horrific fire in Cha-Ching Sao. They said it was started a lady that was doing some cooking, and it kind of flamed up in her kitchen, and she thought she was throwing water on it, and it turned out to be cooking oil. And it just spread from there. So at least half or more of our church families' homes and where they stored their things that they sold were burned out. And the pastor had been there several years. He was very close to the families, and so I got a call from him, which was very unusual back then, but he called and said, "I need you to come and preach for me on Sunday night." He said, "This will be our first service after the fire." And he said, I know I can't do it. He said, "I'll just break down." And that was my biggest challenge, I guess, in that early year, was to come up with a message. And I preached on the 73rd Psalm. I remember that. And I didn't have any recordings of it. I don't know how well I did, but it seemed like it was some encouragement to the folks.